Welcome back to another episode of the 706 podcast, where we talk, debate, and argue with Tony about movies. I'm your host today, Anthony, and my co-hosts are...
Tony.
Connor.
Hello, this is Kirk.
All right, so today we're discussing a movie that Kirk had been dying for me to pitch all this time, years, dying to see a Jesse Eisenberg movie, particularly The Double. So for those who haven't seen it, The Double was basically about sort of this awkward, lonely office worker stuck in this sort of Gilliam-type world that evokes sort of Connor's pick, Brazil. Stuck in this office, so shy, so introverted, can't get anything he wants in life, when one day he wakes up and finds basically his own double, also played by Jesse Eisenberg. And I think we'll let Kirk go last and let his Jesse Eisenberg fandom be known. Let's let Connor go first. Let's change things up.
Sure. I mean, as I mentioned last time, on paper, this is exactly the movie that I would want to make myself. Richard Ayoade, I would want him to direct if I weren't directing, right? Everyone, all of these character actors who are in this, or just actors, period, who are in this film are all great. I like them and everything else they do. Unbelievable set design and that Gilliam-esque, that kind of love letter to Brazil, and of course the source material, which is kind of odd and sort of Gogol or almost Kafka-esque, pre-Kafka sort of story by Dostoevsky. There's nothing that's not to love about this movie, but somehow it overwhelms me and it washes over me, and it didn't grab me. And I think there's something monotonous about how the plot proceeds. There's something that's lost, I think, in taking this into a kind of dystopian fantasy world. I think there's something lost in trying to have both this heightenedness, this broadness to the kind of the comic aspect, but then also a certain kind of reined in and kind of contemplative tone. I think this movie just tries to do everything all at once, but then it lacks a little bit of, I think, complexity or a sort of awareness of how to get the audience involved, I would say. But it's bizarre. I mean, like I said, there's something about it that's kind of weird. I mean, this movie is kind of like my double. It's like it's reflected. Maybe it's a mirror being held up to myself, and I don't like what I see out of this kind of self-loathing. Like, this is exactly the movie I would make if I could, but then I don't like it. I don't know. It's like there's something odd about it. I hope I can elaborate and be a little bit more cogent in explaining why it didn't grab me, but that's my general take.
Yeah, and we'll hopefully we'll get a little bit more about what Connor thinks in comparison to the text itself. So the movie somewhat works, somewhat doesn't work, because it reminds Connor about himself in uncomfortable and horrific ways. But
the kind of beta male, protagonist, the kind of love shy like thing. I mean, this is all stuff I love, but
All right,
I'll let you borrow a metaphor. It's like when I was one summer when I was staying at NYU, I had this fantasy, this fixation. You ever just lie in bed and you have a fixation with like a food thing? I'm like, oh my God, if I had this, if I put this and this together. And I was like, there was like, it's really gross now. It was like Campbell's Chunky, like Fiesta chicken soup or something. And I wanted to mix that with like a chicken over rice. Like I really
yeah.
Like that sounded like the best possible thing. And then when I actually did it, I was like, oh, that wasn't
too much, right?
There's one key question here though. Was it from Mock Corner?
No, it wasn't. Not chicken. They don't have chicken over rice at Mock Corner, man. Come on. Get it together. No, but that wasn't my experience in the movie, but like that is what I thought of when you described it.
Sure.
Like, all your favorite stuff.
That's a very great way
put
of
it all
putting
together.
It.
Didn't necessarily do it in the way you would hope. Yeah, I have similar, Connor and I have similar enough personalities and tastes that I have that same initial thing where I was thinking as I watched this, like, this is the exact kind of thing I would have written in college, like just purely from like the writing standpoint. Like this has so many of like my interests and themes and ideas and like the tone, like it's just, it's so me. I did enjoy it more than Connor, I think. I don't know that I necessarily loved it or it's like one of my favorite movies. I actually don't really remember what I thought. I remember vaguely liking it when I saw it the first time. I saw it in the theater. Yeah, but I think there's a lot to love about this movie. I mean, as Connor mentioned, the visual aesthetic is awesome. Like it looks so good. Like just like there's such Richard Ayoade, like from this and Submarine, like this is such like a step up in terms of just like the visual aesthetic, the production design, the sound design. Like every single scene is so vital. It's so full of life, and just like there's a lot of like amazing little details. It's so rich with detail. It really does feel like Terry Gilliam. I mean, you got Terry Gilliam, you got Wes Anderson, you got a little bit of David Lynch. I definitely got some like Eraserhead vibes in certain scenes. You got that whoosh in the background, and just like he's definitely kind of like throwing all his influences in the bag, which some people might roll their eyes at. I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with that. The influences in this case are just pretty easy to pick out, but I found this movie just aesthetically very stimulating and enjoyable. And I thought the comic chops too are very good. Like it's got that very great dry, like it's a British wit obviously, but it reminds me sort of like of A Serious Man and some of these like Coen brother movies we know. And
yeah, definitely reminded me of Serious Man.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and just kind of that, like the idea of like the one man who the world, this cruel, crazy world. And as far as combining this heightened kind of almost dystopian like steampunk aesthetic with this like kind of the dry and more reserved elements, that to me I think kind of works, because to me it's like this is a world of chaos and disorder. It's like ordered disorder, right? Like there's a bunch of rules and you don't know them. And it's like, what is it like to be a person? I feel like there's a feeling that I know and that I think a lot of people can relate to, of like everyone else knows the rules and you don't. Everyone else received like a book in the mail when they turned 13 years old that described how to conduct yourself and how to live in the world. And you just never got a copy and you're expected to just kind of like stay afloat. So the way Ayoade puts you in that mindset is by rendering a world that is, you know, pretty similar to ours. Really, there's not that different from ours, but like all the specifics are just turned up to 11. So it feels alien. So you feel like this guy. You feel like this guy where the world has an internal order, it has a structure, it has a design. You just don't really know it. And people treat you like an idiot or an evil bastard for not knowing it. And that's a really scary and overwhelming thing. And if it's overwhelming, I think that's part of the design of the movie as well. I mean, there's so much in this movie to talk about. I don't want to talk for, 10 minutes about it or anything. I mean, just a lot of amazing like visual gags and like hilarious moments. Like when they give him this weird like Windex looking drink multiple times. And he's like, I asked for orange juice. Or like this weird trope thing of like the people asking about suicides is like a motif in the movie where they will have people with a clipboard asking questions about suicide and why
we'll put them on the list.
Yeah, and they're very like cheerful and blithe about it. Like a suicide represents this tremendous horror and human pain that only that person can ever know. We can't even fathom. And we're putting it in these little clipboard and we're checking the boxes. Well, what kind of suicide was it? What kind of person was it? Which I love. I love that, the joke of that, the dark joke of that. I love that we get a literalized live action version of the Virgin and the Chad walk meme when they're literally walking next to each other. That was fun. And basically we'll tie it up with just like, I think this movie explores themes we've seen in other movies, even on this podcast. I think we're seeing a lot of motifs here, like through lines with like the idea of dreams and the idea of kind of interrogating and exploring masculinity and the idea of multiple selves. But what I think this movie speaks to, and I think takes very seriously, is just that idea of masculinity and what does masculinity mean, and what do we do with masculinity in the 21st century? Where does that energy go? Because I think that as much of a bastard as James proves to be throughout the film, like I think he represents something that Simon very much wants to be. He wants to do these vile things. He wants to be that person, but he's convinced he can't be that person for whatever reason. And maybe that's good, but I think not wanting to be that person isn't necessarily a moral virtue in itself. And I think it's a tremendously complicated idea. And I think that this movie really engages with it in a variety of ways throughout. So, I mean, I have more to say, but I'm rambling at this point, but I thought this was a really interesting movie and a very enjoyable movie to watch.
All right. So Tony likes it with some reservations. He finds the source material juvenile, something from his adolescent days he may have written, but he's moved on to bigger things. So we'll move on to Kirk, if he's still there.
Kirk?
Sorry, guys. I think I dozed off there. Jeez, sorry about that. A little bit lengthy there, a little bit girthy, Tony. It's okay. I don't know. It looked
lengthy
good.
And girthy, not bad.
The sounds were nice. The faces were pretty. I don't know what to say. You guys like hit everything. I don't like going last. This movie, I don't know. I think it's defined more by its shortcomings to me than its successes. This movie is strictly inferior to Brazil in terms of its world building. I think it focuses too much on trying to give us this forced perspective that neglects to flesh out the world in a more meaningful way. For example, the Colonel is a character that I would have liked to have seen more of, or at least I would have liked to have seen more kind of inferences to the Colonel and what he stood for and who he was. There's a lot of potential in this type of world where everything functions kind of in a very orderly but less than ideal, kind of overly complicated. It's like a retro-futuristic motif that we've seen more and more recently. I think Blade Runner 2049 tried to kind of emulate, at least visually, what this movie was doing in certain areas, as well as just a slew. You see it so much in video games as well. But, I guess I come back to my sticking point, which would be the lead in one Jesse Eisenberg, who apparently has some very famous friends because he keeps getting cast as leads in movies he has no business being in. I think he's a wholly overrated actor. I've expressed this opinion before on this podcast. If any movie he would be typecast for, it would be this movie, right? Like kind of this Michael Cera-esque, without any charisma, like hapless, nobody, mediocre kind of fledgling person. And it's okay. Like the first act is okay, but then you get to the point where there's a double involved. And it just, to me, it felt like a little bit like Tobey Maguire in Spider-Man 3 when he's trying to be cool. And it's like, okay, dude, no, like those girls wouldn't be interested in you in your outsized suit in earth tones. Like, you're a fucking clown. I think the double part of this could have been created more elegantly, I would say, instead of just kind of like this jocular, like, this is what you got to do. You got to treat women this way. You got to do this Tyler Durden type of bullshit. That I just so boring to me. And I think the trope of a double in a movie, one that excels at everything while you're, failing, is a little played out to an extent. I can't really pull many other instances, but I know I've seen it quite a great deal. At least the idea that I'm doing all the work, yet someone else is getting all the credit, right? And the ending, too, was a little confusing. And this is where I'm a small brain guy. But so I realize there's like a recursive nature between him and the double, where if he's hurt, the double's also hurt. So his idea, rather than like defeating the double, I guess he realizes that the double is a metaphor and it's Tyler Durden all along. Is that kind of what he realizes? And then he doesn't like what he sees in the double, or he's kind of resigned to the fact that he's not going to be able to accommodate those attributes into his own self. And so he's like, well, if I can't be the double, I may as well kill him too. I was a little confused by the end, and I know that kind of makes me a little bit smooth brain there, but that's okay. I guess I'd like to hear your thoughts on the end. But, so it was kind of like a petit four, like a little tiny French delicacy of a world that I wish had
Bring
been
us down
expanded.
to earth, Kirk. Petit four? Come on.
What?
Sorry, with all these $10 words, Kirk. Petit four?
Means small four, guys.
I thought you were the populist one here.
He's getting those SAT word of the days.
Sorry, Kirk.
Well,
He has
no,
to
it's
come
fine.
back after you.
It's fine. I know a couple French words. I've seen enough Wes Anderson, you know. So I wish it was fleshed out into like something more substantive than it was, and like you see it on the periphery, and I just want to like go that way. I don't give a fuck about what he's saying or what's going on in his head. I actually just want to explore this world, and I want to like soak it in a little bit more. And you know, I guess so that's where that comes down to personal taste. I still enjoyed the movie, so I guess I'm doing a lot of complaining, but I still did enjoy it. Kind of like Tony with the Charlie Kaufman we were just talking about. But
yeah, all right.
Yeah.
So Kirk,
it's a good movie, but it's just
Kirk saying it didn't escargot anywhere. Right, Kirk?
No, it did, but it's just for me, it's a movie that's defined more by the absence, by the negative space, than it is by what's actually on the screen. And I don't think that's a design decision, right? So that's kind of my feeling of longing.
Okay, so somewhat lukewarm, tepid response from Kirk. Wishes it was sort of a open sandbox video game just to move around and control Jesse Eisenberg. But all right, so let's see. I think I should say to start is when I first saw this movie, I think I was kind of like probably most aligned also like Tony was to Connor. I had read, the story, whatever, in a class. I know it was like one of Dostoevsky's least favorite of his own written material. And I go into the movie, in my house, Richard Ayoade can do no wrong. I love the IT Crowd. I love Submarine at the time. I think it's a shame, actually, still, that he hasn't made a movie since The Devil, directed-wise anyway. So it popped up in the souvenir. But when I first saw this, when it came out, I liked it, but I also wasn't sure if I liked it. And I think there were certain things I was responding to, which were kind of things you picked out, which was like, I loved the atmosphere, the mood, the set design, the kind of Terry Gilliam Brazil-like response. But I think it's only now I sort of really have come around to really like it a lot more. Because for me, I realized is that Brazil was sort of the effect of the sort of bureaucracy, work world capitalism, and the idea that like you get to escape into that sort of negative dream world, right? The sort of fantasy that however mad it is here, that there's still that other option, even if it means you're insane in this sort of reality to at least the people around you, right? But The Double is just such a much more bleak, fitting for the time, I think, moment where this sort of office and bureaucracy world offer you no alternative at all, not even in the dream realm. That the only dream realm there is this other you that's getting everything you want. And it's funny that you bring up Tyler Durden, because I'm sure that's such an apt parallel. I'm sure Richard Ayoade know about the film. But in that movie, your you is still like this extremely attractive, sexy guy who's able to do like the sort of hyper masculine things you would, in that space at least, want to get done. But here it's just Jesse Eisenberg. And I think that's such a fascinating choice, because it's like, why is Jesse Eisenberg getting all this stuff? Like, there should be no reason to. He has none of the sort of superficial qualities there. And at the end of the day, what the movie leaves me with is sort of this great portrayal, I think, for me at least, of a sort of anxiety and depression that I don't quite see depicted in the way it is here. And that is a depression which the alternative, or the sort of route that it's offering this sort of escape, is this bleaker and bleaker humor, in which death itself and the sort of suicide becomes not just a taboo, but a taboo we could finally joke about. And I think it's one of my favorite moments is, and I know this could ring false for a lot of people, but it's when Mia Wasikowska's character basically says like, I think you should go kill yourself, and I'm not going to interrupt you while you're doing so, which I understand could have a lot of problems for a certain type of audience. But for me, I actually like that perspective because I find it so great from the perspective of a depressed type of person, the sort of idea of just there's no escape. But because you recognize it, there's only a sort of sense of absurdity that you could joke around with. And I think the movie actually wants to be playful about this sort of bleakness at times. And so, I mean, for me, it has an emotional resonance, which is funny because I think a lot of your responses when you're first starting off are all about the sort of architecture and the sort of, mood of it. But to me, it is such a human movie. And I think it does do a little bit too much. And I think it is in some ways a sort of glorious like failure. But it's the type of like failure I love to see in a kind of movie. And I don't feel like we get it enough. So
what about it as a failure to you if you like it so much?
I think it's a failure in the sense, I think everything you say has a point. I think Connor was saying it loses for him a track of the sort of humanness at times, if I heard you right. And I think that's true. I think there is a point, especially like before we get to the sort of the girl he likes committing her suicide. I think it starts to get a little too playful with its own world, and it gets away from his kind of perspective a bit too much for me. And I know it does for certain other people too. I think at times, like it's like you were saying, Tony, there's just so much influence at times that you're almost distracted. And at times you almost need a more narrow focus. And I think like Kirk was saying is there is a sort of wonder here of, how would this role have been without Jesse Eisenberg, who at times is distracting. And at times I do love him in this role, but I could understand the complaint. I don't really like Michael Cera, so it's hard for me to picture that either. But I'm sympathetic towards Kirk's claims.
Yeah, I think it's kind of muddied my idea of like whether we're looking at it from a more personal or systemic perspective. And I can dig the idea of like this is kind of an intimate look at what the inner workings of somebody who's in a world that is just totally absurd and they have yet to come to grips with it, right? Like they know it, but they've created defenses to allow themselves to exist in the world and to allow themselves to survive, right?
Yeah.
But I think my problem is when we're zooming into that person is Jesse Eisenberg. and it's, it's so unfortunate, but
Wait, real quick, Kirk. I just have a question about the Jesse Eisenberg thing. Is it that you think that, like, I'm just trying to understand, because I think he's very good in this role. I think he's great. I think he plays both characters very well.
Right.
So I'm just trying to understand, like, is it that you think he does not like portray these characters well? Like, you don't find it like a convincing, you don't see a real psychology behind these affectations he's doing. It doesn't feel authentic, or is it that like you just don't like him on like a visceral level? Like you don't like seeing him, you don't like his voice, you don't like the way he moves and talks. Like, what is it about him you find so disagreeable?
I don't like the timbre of his voice. I don't like how he, his stature. But also he always has that perplexed pursed lips face with, his chin jutted out, and that I fucking hate that. But regardless, is it subtext for like the double to be kind of like purposefully unbelievable and bad? Not, I know like the circumstances are like, oh wow, everybody's fawning at him, but like the idea that his kind of tricks are working, is it supposed to be like a poor imagination of what somebody, I guess I'm missing the subtext here, whether or not, where is the metaphor and where is, I don't know, can somebody elucidate that?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think we're supposed to, as we're watching, kind of almost be smirking or questioning, like, why is, this double in particular getting away with this? Like, what is his personality so different in comparison to that? Like I brought up Fight Club, but also another one would be like Enemy, the Jake Gyllenhaal double movie, where his double is also in a similar way, but that's a handsome Jake Gyllenhaal. You brought it up with Zodiac as well. I think here though, the whole question is like, Jesse Eisenberg's double is still Jesse Eisenberg. It's kind of a joke. And I think The Office, like itself, I don't know if you noticed this, but this time I noticed is outside of him and Hannah, Mia Wasikowska, is everyone else is old. So there's also this like perpetual fear, right, of being stuck there forever. But then you're stuck with this like horrible double, and this double who actually knows how to navigate it in a way that's going to get him out from aging here.
Yeah, to get back to your point, Tony, he's just one of those actors that I can't extricate him.
You see Jesse Eisenberg. You don't see whatever the character.
Exactly. I see Jesse Eisenberg.
Right.
I did not see Mark Zuckerberg. I saw Jesse Eisenberg. And so that's a problem when you're an actor and especially in a movie that's predicated on your ability to portray multiple versions of the same person, right? Because you just see like it's like a funhouse mirror almost. But anyways, that's all I'll say about that. So
I just wanted to pick off Anthony's point, though, because it's interesting because, yes, I don't think it's a literal, like there's something sort of unbelievable about what he's pulling off, right? I think that's definitely true. And Kirk's going to roll his eyes, but yeah, that feeds into like kind of the metaphor, allegory, dream thing. But I mean, I think in this movie, how can you not have that conclusion? It's so surreal. It's over the top. Isn't it obvious that it's like surreal and like not meant to be taken literally? The one thing, though, that I do find kind of problematic perhaps is that I'm not quite sure what he's an exact metaphor for, because I think there's a lot of psychological truth in this movie. There's a lot of myself I see in this movie, but I wonder if the double is deployed in a way that's consistent. And maybe Anthony can steer me right here and show me that in fact it is a completely consistent metaphor. Because on the one hand, it's like, it's your other version of yourself. It's like you imagine, I think we all have this idea of like, if we have nature and nurture, right? And I have the same nature, but different nurture, or I made different choices, right? Assuming free will exists and I made different decisions along the road, I would be a better, cooler, richer person. I'd be a more successful person. You know, I'd have better luck with women. I'd have better luck in my career. I'd have better luck in school. I would make all these choices and be a better person. And that's like he's a literalization of that. He's a manifestation of that fear and that anxiety that I think we all have on some level. That idea that if I had made different choices, if I had been more committed, if I had been braver, if I had done this, if I had done that, all these forks in the road, if we had taken the other fork, what would happen? So I think he's that on one level. There's also the element too of like, I feel like when you are like the main guy, I can't remember names. I think it's Steven. But when you're Simon. In that mind, Simon, I'm sorry. I'm just respecting him. That's how little you can respect him. When you are Simon, when you're in that mental space and you see a person who's doing those things that you wish you were doing, you see that person as a threat. You see that person as evil. You see that person as a bastard. So you have to make them out to be the worst possible version of that, because they're a threat to your way of life. They're a threat to your own decisions, because if they're a good person, if they're a happy person, if they're a noble person, then what's wrong with you? There has to be a cost. There has to be a catch, right? And the catch is he's going to hell. The catch is he's bad and he's a bastard and he doesn't even realize, but I'm noble and I'm pure. So there's that. And then on the third level, you have the idea of like, he can't keep getting away with this. Like Jesse says in Breaking Bad, he can't keep getting away with this. Like this idea of like, we see someone do something we really wish we can do, but we've convinced ourselves we can't. We think, how can they get away with that? And then you're like, well, because who get away? Like, what's going to happen? What's going to happen to them? Nothing's going to happen. It's only we that are imposing that idea that there has to be consequences. At the end of the day, we're responsible for our own choices. So those are three kind of distinct concepts. And I don't know, I think the movie kind of moves willy-nilly between them, which I think is perhaps problematic, but I think they all speak to something very real and that I can relate to.
I think there's also another level to that, which is also the perspective of everybody else outside viewing it in, right? Because the fascinating thing is, like you're saying, is his double starts off very simplistically, just having a sort of assertiveness, sort of bravery about doing the things he can't. But if we're taking it then as his sort of unconscious writers, he's quickly turning him into a very horrific person, right? He's quickly sleeping with kind of the daughter, possibly underage, right, of the boss, blackmailing or potentially blackmailing Simon. And he also is knocking up Hannah at one point. And we find out very towards the end that when she goes to kill herself, she's actually pregnant, which is actually a subplot I don't like. It's like a detail that I find too convenient. But I think part of it, right, is that even in our own sort of projection of who we could be, who we want to be, that there's the element that if we are that for the people around us and for society, that's actually something pretty awful and pretty horrific, that no matter where we are, we're always sort of broken. And that even his double is on that own end. He's a horrific, evil sort of person. But I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, Connor. I feel like we cut you off.
No. The gears are turning. I'm trying to think. I mean, that is a really good way of thinking about it. I was going to say something like, well, okay, like the Eisenberg character, right? The double character that he imagines it's a reflection of his own maybe blinkered, maybe narcissistic viewpoint, right? That might be one typical take you might, but I really like this idea, right? So that he imagines, he himself is kind of a narcissist, even in his kind of insect-like existence, and that character, that totally selfish character, is the only kind of ideal that he can imagine for himself based on his own kind of selfish, or kind of repressed selfishness, that he doesn't get to express because he's too timid. But I really like what Tony said, the idea, like just that idea of, that you, in order to be different, that change is so intimidating, that you need to imagine some completely catastrophic outcome of changing. If I were to change it all, I would be this disastrous asshole. There's something psychologically very true about that. I don't know, maybe in my personal experience, Yeah, that's really interesting. But if I could just back to the whole Eisenberg, litigating the whole Eisenberg issue, no, I do wish it was something like a Michael Cera. I mean, like, he lacks a warmth. Compare him to like Jonathan Pryce in Brazil, right? Kind of a bumbler character, a nervous energy, a kind of an attempt, a real striving of a sort, right? There's something that we can follow along with that. And I think even having the double be also having a similar kind of energy. I think Eisenberg could do this. I mean, I think he chose, right? This was a directorial decision that he should be the kind of cold and calculating, sort of staccato Eisenberg, but I think it lacked the warmth, and it lacked that, I don't know, that quality of that nervous character that we could have both sides. I mean, I think, right, we, on the one hand, we want to kind of sympathize with him a little bit, right, to kind of feel his pain, I guess, to an extent, but he also has to have a kind of venom to him, as well, right, that we can kind of buy him as, as being kind of the snake, as he's kind of called in the film. But okay, now I'm just getting at all of my ideas. But I want to circle back to one thing that Anthony mentioned towards the beginning. Sorry for this monologue. That Anthony mentioned, right? This idea of Mia Wasikowska's character Hannah saying, like, okay, I wish, like I would be a better friend to you. I wouldn't, try to stop you from killing yourself. The joke is saying, go kill yourself, right? But then there's also this funny element of this irony of like, well, that would be the really friendly thing to do. That's an interesting take. I mean, you're reading into it and finding the meaning there, but I think, Mia Wasikowska was never a friend. She is just a kind of object. She is just an aspirational thing, that really only reads to me like almost every single beat in this movie is just a joke about how, can you believe how cruel this world is to this guy, which is the kind of the single note. Or it's like, can you believe that Eisenberg is like making this racist joke and everyone loves it, like that kind of thing, right? It's that same idea over and over and over again, and there's no movement or development in that, I think.
But don't you think, and we could actually start moving towards the end of the film since Kirk brought that up too, don't you think though by the time we hear that joke, we're in a point where we're so deep into Simon's head that has to be the moment? That all this time up until that moment, Hannah is kept at a distance. She's always the thing he wants. And the only time he talks to her, right, is when she's finally expressing interest for his double. So then we get to the moment where he actually finally gets close to her. And the closeness is brought on by her want to commit suicide. He resurrects, he brings together her art, which she wanted to keep broken, which has a sort of hidden truth to it that she didn't want brought up. That the very things that you think are saving a person's life are actually only reigniting a sense of trauma for her. And so I think that moment connects well with the kind of end, right? When if we take this sort of suicide then as literal and we get to the end, that is the truth of the sort of world that it's bringing. It's a sort of bleak, absurd joke, which is that death is the one unique and not unique moment, right? Happens to everybody. But at the same time, to commit suicide is to take the unique choice of ending it early. And that's why when they are talking to him and they're like, you're a pretty interesting guy or whatever, and he says, I would like to think so, that is the punchline ultimately. And I think that moment with Hannah has to hit there. I don't think it's because of a friendship, but I think it's because of the friendship he wants. And he wants someone to recognize that about how he views death, life, society by the end of the movie.
That's interesting. If no one else has anything to say, I would like, Anthony, could you elaborate? That was really interesting, and I kind of missed it. I missed this idea of the putting. Sorry, not missed what you said, but I missed it when I was watching the movie about putting back the pieces, or of not wanting, of just the theme of suicide in the movie, which I maybe I gave short shrift. With Mia Wasikowska's character and the plot element of her art that she shreds and then throws into the kind of memory hole sort of analog down this trash chute. Could you just elaborate on that, or do you want me,
I think it's like what Kirk was saying at the beginning, right? Is we have this sort of bureaucracy joke, a la Brazil, which is trying to count, trying to limit everything into a sort of sheet, including death, including suicide. There's the joke, or I think Tony may brought it up, about trying to put suicide into a sort of chart, trying to put it even onto a sheet. But the cruel irony of this sort of film and the world it creates is that it's the one thing that can't quite fully be captured on the chart because it's completely of an emotional jump based on the sort of depression, the anxiety, the loneliness of all these characters.
Death can't be captured on the chart.
Yeah. And that is the sort of absurd, bleak joke that the movie's like pulling the rug out from the end.
Sure.
There's a thing, a moment earlier where James is talking to the daughter of the boss, and he's like, he's just spouting off. Like, he's just saying, he doesn't even know what he's saying. He's just saying like kind of pseudo intellectual nonsense. But there's a line in it about like, well, data collection, it's all about, these were people, these were hopes, these were dreams, we're immortalizing people. So it is kind of, I like that they seed that theme in there, but in a moment where like we're not supposed to take it seriously because we know he's kind of full of shit. But it is kind of a little foreshadowing for that idea, or it kind of reinforces that theme.
Yeah. Well, I think we could, unless Kirk wants to add something, move on. But I will say it's hilarious how for 4 people who aren't huge Jesse Eisenberg fans, I feel like we've done a lot of Jesse Eisenberg movies.
Really have done a lot of Eisenberg.
Lives rent-free in our heads, man.
Yeah. All right. Kirk, you want to kick us off?
Well, I mean, just in conclusion, I would say that I think the more radical choice would have been for him to like coexist with his double and to embrace whatever she was, and embrace each other and share their vulnerabilities. I think the more calculated decision, and this is why the movie is like a one-note thing for me as well as Connor, is like, yeah, suicide is highly emotional, you're right, but every day people kill themselves impulsively merely for the fact that they went bankrupt, their wife left, like they're facing prison. It's not like they want to die, they just don't see a better option. So for me, it's kind of like this kind of logical end. It was like, well, of course he would do that. So it was a little bit
it's the most boring choice.
Yeah, it was just a one note. It was kind of a one note ending for me. That being said, I can appreciate that I like this movie enough that I think I have to give the writing and the art design and kind of the general pacing a thumbs up, because if there was another actor, someone a little warmer, like Connor said, that would really bring out the tragic elements and, away from the absurdity a little bit, on the spectrum, kind of turn it down, which I think Eisenberg succeeds at the absurd in this movie, kind of bringing it out and contrasting it. I would have really loved this movie. So I'll give it a yes.
All right. Well, at least I was actually surprised we got Kirk to sort of turn, and I don't know if my arguments quite fully persuaded him, but they worked for me. But I also had an Albert Camus poster in my dorm room, so we'll move on.
Tony, could you go?
Sure. I'll say, yeah, I see what you're saying about the warmth element. I think that was a very perceptive point, Connor, about Eisenberg's kind of presentation and like how we regard him, because I think our favorite performances and our favorite movie characters, we come to love that character. Even if they're a villain, we love them on some level. Like Heath Ledger's Joker. Like, I love that character. I find him thrilling. And like, I can't see anyone loving Jesse Eisenberg in this or really any other movie. Like, he's a kind of an unlovable guy. There's something fundamentally at distance there. So I can see kind of what Kirk is talking about. One last thing, though, that I'm shocked it didn't get more discussion was like, this movie's gorgeous. This movie looks so good. Like, the lighting is amazing. Like just the visuals and just the sound, like the music choices are so inspired and so unexpected. The use of the Japanese songs, like the mood is so good. The atmosphere is so good. And just stuff like that funeral scene looks so good. Like that's really next level stuff. Anyway, I'll give it a yes, kind of a soft yes, because I don't know if these things all tie together in the perfect, tight way that I would like, but it is a really fascinating movie, and I very much enjoyed watching it, so I'll go be yes.
Yeah, I have to say, Anthony, it's like a 12 Angry Men, situation. I mean, in our conversation, I've seen a lot, I've thought about a lot that I didn't think about while I was watching it. And I think it's only fair to kind of give the movie its due on top of all the visual elements. However, I have to say, like, despite these issues that we've discussed, how much meat is there on the bone? How interesting or well executed is that ending? I still have to ask that. And yes, still there's a very one note aspect, to just the progression of the movie. I'm going to give it a very, very soft no. I have to say, if we had had another no, I think I would have voted yes to make it get in. And also, I think it would be a shame for this movie not to get in, because of just how much we've been talking about previous movies we've watched for the podcast or movies we watch outside of the podcast, how this movie kind of enables us, it's kind of responding to other movies that we've seen. I think that's really, really cool. It makes it a really interesting and cool pick. I'm going to give it a very soft no, just to represent my reservations about it, but I think it definitely deserves to be in the 706.
All right, well, it's in, despite Connor seeing that big bowl that Tony described of rice, chicken, barbacoa, all sorts of meat.
I went back that next night and I did it all over again. I'm like, why am I doing this? This isn't I don't even like this.
All right, we'll move on to the voting section. Who went least recent or whatever it is?
I went least recent, but I'm having a hard time. So why don't we do Kirk and then Connor?
All right. Have you seen Double all the time?
I've not.
No?
No, this is the movie Tony was raving about or talking about forever.
All right. Well,
I was excited for it.
I'm just going to throw it out there. Okay. Couple things here. This movie resonated extremely deeply with me. I thought this movie was excellent. I thought one of the best casts of the last 5 years, probably, easily. It's directed by the Simon Killer director. So Antonio Campos, we got some history there, a little redemption tour for him. You have Robert Pattinson, you have Tom Holland, you have who else but Mia Wasikowska. She is actually in this movie. She looks hideous in this movie by design. I think she's kind of one of those actresses who can go either way. Like, she's like a very versatile. She has that Eastern European kind of rough look to her at times, which is also very beautiful. But regardless, I'm getting off topic. A gruesome film.
That's its own podcast.
Yeah, I'll just remove all that. Don't worry,
guys. A gruesome film. The first 30 minutes of this movie are like the first 10 minutes of Up.
It is a nasty ass,
gruesome
ass film. Yeah.
Just like the grandpa floats away on a balloon, and then what else was I going to say? We haven't done a new release. I mean, this movie came out.
We did the Wild Goose.
Okay, that was like a year and a half later.
No, it got U.S. release in spring 2020. It was one of the last ones before Corona.
2019.
Yeah. All right, Look it up, folks.
Okay, and I also think Tony needs to rewatch, because I think he did come in with the book in his head and he would turn it around. But you guys, regardless of whether or not you choose it, both of you do need to see this movie, in my personal opinion. This strikes all the boxes for me. Anyways, go ahead. The music, too. Go.
I don't know.
I'm really fascinated to see it. Oh man, I'm down to 2. I wish I could read Anthony's mind and his mood to be able to tell which one I should pick. Okay, I'll go with the one at the top of my list. Yorgos Lanthimos' Dogtooth. I forget exactly when it came out, 2009. We've discussed Yorgos Lanthimos among ourselves. It's kind of one of the directors, I think, Tony and I especially, we're kind of fans. We've got to see a lot of his movies. This is kind of his kind of breakout film. It's in Greek, before he kind of made the transition to English language. And I think it just distills a lot of what's really amazing about him. And it really stands out to me, like by far, kind of among his work, as something that really stands the test of time, or in my memory, just of the impact it left on me. And I think it's a very interesting kind of drama about kind of the nuclear family. It's a dark, kind of very twisted version of the nuclear family.
Okay, guys, do you want of my movies, which did you like more, Simon Killer or Barney's Great Adventure? That'll determine what I pick today. Which would you?
That's a really good. Great Adventure was
Barney's Great Adventure.
Time.
Barney's. All right. In that case, there's a movie I'm just kind of throwing this out there, but like I saw it and I'm just like, I need to go back to this someday. I need to return to this movie. I'm mentally bookmarking it. And that was The Book of Henry. Did you guys hear about The Book of Henry?
Yeah. I don't remember.
It was
I never saw it.
it was a movie that was kind of instantly notorious. It was the reason, I forget the name of the director, but he did Jurassic World, and he was slated to do Star Wars 9. And then because of this movie, he lost Star Wars 9, basically, because it was such a misfire, basically, just tonally. It's basically a movie that tries to combine like kind of a Hallmark kind of sweet saccharine family movie feel with these like very dark elements in a way that is incredibly strange and jarring. It's one of the weirdest viewing experiences I've ever had. And I was laughing a lot of the time. It has some really hilarious and messed up moments. And I think that if this same script were directed by the Coen brothers, it could have been a strange, twisted masterpiece. But instead we got this really lumpen, misshapen clump of a movie that I think there's just so much to just pull apart, and it's not a good movie, but it's a fascinating movie, and I was thoroughly entertained by it.
All right, we get some rebuttals.
Yeah,
Go.
it's a tough one. You know, no 3 Japanese movies from 1942.
Yeah.
6 hour long.
It's a shame.
Jeez. I mean, we could watch a bad movie whenever we want, Tony. What are we doing here? This is the 706. This is canon. You think the Book of Henry deserves a place?
I do, yeah.
You really do.
I think yes, in a way. I mean, I think The Room is canon in its own way.
Okay.
Yeah, I've watched that movie more than like any other movie. I love it, you know?
Yeah, you're right. I was just down at IFC. I saw Book of Henry was main billing this weekend. But
guys, we can get in on the ground floor. We can be the ones that bring it back, you know?
We live in a post-ironic age, Tony. Like, this is played out. I wanted to say a little bit more about Devil All the Time. It's a movie that boils down to one specific banal choice and then is so perfectly crafted that dozens of millions, literally billions of choices in the movie are a result of this specific decision, and it spans decades. It's kind of one of those, the precise word. It's a movie about predestination versus free will, the idea of how we relate to God and how we relate to spirituality. It has a very cynical view of religion, but I think there's a way to kind of push back on that and see it more through the lens of our own corruption of the institution as opposed to the teachings, which are in and of themselves perhaps quite pure or well-intended. So it's a very interesting watch and a great conversation piece that we could dive into. I haven't seen Dogtooth. I tended to kind of feel like Yorgos movies are a little bit, there's a lot of pretense. I don't know. He's not my guy. We all have our guys, and he's not my guy. So
like the Killing of a Sacred Deer.
I mean, I liked the who's the actor? Who's
Colin
the guy?
Farrell?
No, not fucking Colin Farrell. The Connor.
Barry
Son?
Keaton. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
very
There's
good.
also me.
From Dunkirk.
Yes,
Yeah.
I liked him, but I don't know. The ending of Killing of a Sacred Deer, if somebody wants to explain that to me in less than 2,000 words, I'd be happy to hear about it. Him eating fries and staring blankly out the window. I mean, what the fuck is going on? While Mozart's Seventh plays, but Yorgos, not my guy. Book of Henry, dumpster fire trash. All right, go ahead.
I think these are 3 good choices. I would not mind watching The Devil All the Time again, just because I'm curious what you guys would think. I'm curious. I want to hear Kirk kind of elaborate on what he responded to so much in this movie. And I mean, he did a little bit, but I would like to get into it more. And although I have to say, Devil All the Time to me is such a monkey's paw situation where I'm like, after Simon Killer, I'm like, I wanted to bring my boy's name, I wanted to like redeem him, and then I see this movie and I'm just like, I don't like it. So it would be the opposite. We'd be on opposite sides of the old Simon Killer battle. It would be like a father and son meeting again on the field of battle on opposite sides of the Mason-Dixon line. I mean, that's how it would feel. I won't say who's who in this situation. And Connor's movie is really cool. It's a great movie. I think that's a perfect fit. So I think I think mine has kind of the most novelty. Mine is the most kind of wacky and wild, and I think it'd be a really fun episode. But I think they're all good choices.
I could always go for something wacky and wild, but it is true what Kirk says. We're trying to go for the canonical films, though I absolutely wouldn't mind a one-off doing something a little wacky. And I don't know anything about it, so I'm thrilled to hear it. I don't know anything about The Devil All the Time. I heard it's great. And I would just say I'm really curious. I mean, this is one of those picks. The way I decided was, the movies that Anthony picks are the ones where there's a 50% chance that he could hate it. So this is definitely one of those ones. I think I'd be really curious. I think Anthony could have a great takedown of this movie. Or, right, he may really like it and have a lot to say. I think the themes are there for the analysis. It's a sparse and kind of very stylized movie, but at the same time, there's definitely some meat on the bones for kind of social and political ruminations.
Interesting.
I think that's every movie. Anthony, have you ever gone into a movie knowing if you'll like it or hate it? Like, what's that like?
Very rarely do I go in saying I'm gonna hate it. Like, I actually was telling Shay this is like I always go in like hoping I love the movie. Like, I wanted like a movie to be like one of my favorites. Like, I always want like a transformative experience, which may be like the opposite of that problem, right?
Like Transformers, right?
Yes, exactly. Well, Bumblebee, the
spin-off. I heard that was good. I don't know.
I didn't see it. Okay. All interesting choices, all drawbacks. Let's see. I think, like Kirk was saying, Yorgos is, I liked Killing of a Sacred Deer, but I have a very hard time sometimes thinking about like being like, let's go watch one of his movies. Tony's film was a movie I was dying to see at the time for the reasons he outlaid. It's kind of a sort of Us logic that he outlaid, which is like, these movies I actually think are kind of terrible, but like really fascinate me. So that kind of has something going for it, if that makes sense. Kirk's movie, it's always great to know that Kirk and Tony are on sort of opposite ends. It's always a good start to any sort of conversation. But let's see, this is tough. I'm going to go with The Book of Henry.
All right.
Nice.
No.
You chose well. This will be.
Yeah.
It'll be a good episode for anything. I don't know if it'll get in, but it'll be a good episode.
Yeah, man. I had no idea what to expect. I'm gonna try to go.
Anything about this movie, guys? I'm telling you, don't look up anything about it.
Sure. Cool.
I looked up its Metacritic and it's a fucking red number. That's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. That means we're gonna be the ones. We're the brave souls who are gonna dig up the buried treasure.
Gosh.
Yeah, we're the In Rainbows crowd. In Rainbows is better than OK Computer.
I get it.
The contrarian.
Well, that was a critically acclaimed album at the time, though, so it's not quite analogous. But
I get it. Anthony, you just don't want us to get big so we can be big and famous. You want to do fucking this dog shit. You know what? Well, then get a replacement.
Kirk, you know what else has a red score on Metacritic is Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, which has become a canonized cult movie, considered one of David Lynch's best by many people. And I think when in 50 years this has that same place in canon, people will pull up this podcast and say, these were the ones. They're the ones who made that argument.
We'll be the little reception blurb on Wikipedia.
Yeah, exactly. We'll be in the second paragraph. But then...
No, Kirk, I was this close, and you almost had me because you named one of my favorite actors. So, Mia Wasikowska.
Yeah, no,
I really love her in like everything I've seen.
She's like an Eastern European, like Kirsten Dunst. You know what I mean? It's interesting. But I just, Tony, your association was Barney's Great Adventure. Like, what the fuck? That wasn't, what was that?
You picked
that
it.
Was a shit show.
Anthony picked it.
That was a clown
It
fiesta.
was that or his Simon Killer.
I picked it?
I mean, we had to choose.
No, I'm saying you picked. It still worked. He's saying, why would I pick that comparison? I'm like, well, you still saying that's not a cult classic.
If Tony hadn't seen it so recently, I definitely would have probably done Kirk's.
No, I'm curious about why you compared it to Barney's Great Adventure, which was pure trash.
They're not really analogous. It's just like, of the two movies I picked, those are the closest points of comparison. Like, which Tony mode do you want? Which part of me do you want to see?
The messed up or the wet?
Okay.
Which double? Do you want me to be Simon or Jake?
Yeah.
Either
I
way.
won't say which is which.
Wait, Tony, I may regret asking this now because I made the choice, but do you actually like this movie?
Yeah, I like it. I mean,
Okay.
what is
You're not going to go in with like this like cool, ironic Like,
I mean,
oh yeah, I made you guys
I
pick
don't
up.
buy into that. I think that like I don't believe in guilty pleasures. I think if you enjoy a movie, it's a good movie.
You're not gonna like post like a YouTube, Twitch stream of like, look what I made these people watch.
No, not at all. I mean, it's not a Barney situation. Like, I enjoy watching this film. I enjoy watching it, and I would recommend that other people watch it. But again, like, I would say that about The Room, so you can, take that with a grain of salt, so.
Well, it'll be interesting regardless, I think.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
All right, guys. I'll have what she's having.
Have I ever liked what?
A movie more than the book in any instance?
Yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of like I'm Thinking of Ending Things, like the movie, but I thought it was like a huge improvement on the book.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's an interesting take. Anthony, it's funny you said that because when we texted about it and I said it was good, and then later you're like, I'm surprised you liked it. Like immediately it like soured in my memory. Like passing hour, I liked it less. I was just like, yeah.
Well, everything about that movie had like the things that you had said you recently had turned against Kaufman for. So
well, as I was watching it, I liked it. Like as I was watching it, I was kind of taken in by it, and like it also very much flatters the viewer. Like the whole like Paul and Kale thing. It's like, wow, aren't you smart for getting
the DFW?
I felt very flattered as I was watching it. And then I thought about it later. I'm like, it was just the same thing. He did this. He's made the same movie 3 times in a row. I want him to move on. I want him to do something else. And
what's that? Give the broad strokes. What are his trappings?
It's basically Anomalisa.
Well, the thing is, like, it's different in the sense that it's like aesthetically it's very different, and the plot is very different. But thematically, he's just in that same. He makes like these, I call them first-person movies, and that they're subjective. They put you in the head of this like lonely, alienated person, which the first time you see it is like really novel and really cool. But once you've seen it a few times, it kind of gets old. Like Synecdoche, New York, I still love. And I think that's the best version of that idea. That's like the purest expression of that. But like Anomalisa, it felt just diminishing returns. These feel like smaller versions of that same. It's like I want him to do so. I want him to make another, like being John Malkovich. I want him to show that level of like imagination and inventiveness and like fun again. And I just don't think he has it in him.
He has like a weird line. It's like he's always treading like being on like complete solipsism, and like lately he's kind of just crossed it too much, and like there's no like sense of like self-consciousness of like, don't you understand that what you're doing is like kind of like just like jerking yourself off.
It feels really masturbatory and just like, wow, I'm so sad. And Charlie Kaufman, me, it feels authentic. Like I believe he's very sad. Like he has convinced me of that, but I want a little bit more. I want him to give me what does that mean? Like, what's the significance of that sadness? What are you sad about?
Would you think though, like this is like an unfair question about the movie, but like the main guy in it is just doing like the biggest Philip Seymour Hoffman impersonation like I've ever seen.
Really?
Jesse, like that part like kind of bugged me.
Interesting.
Yeah. At times I was just like, Philip Seymour Hoffman impersonations always.
I wish also he had done
my
more.
last decade of my life.
What was the last decade of your life?
I said solipsism defined the last decade of my life. Maybe I should see it.
Yeah, maybe you did.
Oh, you meant one big. The last decade of your life was one big Philip Seymour Hoffman impersonation.
Yeah, that's what I thought too. I think if we all saw this movie when we were like 19 or 20, though, we would all be talking about it in the dorms for like a while.
Movie, yeah. I think that I don't know. I still think
like, is that like a movie? Like, I don't know. I want to push back against that. Is that a movie that takes risks? Like, is that a movie that's kind of like a dorm movie, like a movie that wants to explore emotions in kind of a raw way?
I think it's a movie that appeals to like a young person that like flatters you. It's kind of vaguely more, it's a little bit more intellectual, a little bit more challenging. It's maybe provocative or like edgy in certain ways. And like, for instance, like in I'm Thinking of Ending Things, there's kind of a riff or like a scene where a character is impersonating Mabel from A Woman Under the Influence. And it's like, if you've seen that movie, there's this little bit of, you get a little bit of buzz off of that. You get a little
tickled
bit
my
like,
fancy.
I'm a smart
Yeah.
little boy. I'm a
Yeah.
It's sort of like a superficial intelligence, though. Like, it doesn't do anything with it. Like, it
Yeah,
kind of like
exactly.
flatters just the knowledge of it, as opposed to like a sort of, you know, interrogation of it.
Well, no, I mean, I think it plays a role. I mean, you get it because this character has like seen that movie and read that review, and like he's just these ideas floating in his head. Like, I understand why it's in the movie, but I'm just saying, like, there's something kind of like shallow about it or kind of empty about it. It's almost like it's a more pretentious version of like Family Guy jokes about 80s movies, like kind of, you know.
You're saying dormhood or a dorm movie is defined by its associations, the associations?
No, not that specifically. More just like it flatters your intelligence. It makes
A little
you
brainy,
smart.
but not very
It
deep.
makes you work your gears a little bit. You know, because the best movies aren't necessarily the movies that are like challenging or complicated. Some are certainly, but there's also, I think, a beauty in like simplicity. And it's the same way we always joke, like in film school, we would joke about like everyone in film school hates Steven Spielberg. Like everyone's like, oh, Spielberg, he's so sappy. But most critics and filmmakers love Steven Spielberg because he's like one of the greats. He's a master, right? So it's like you go through this phase where you kind of rebel against the basic and the simple and the
Sentimental, earnest.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You're more into kind of irony and sophistication and savviness.
Just take some of your complaints about Blue Velvet, extrapolate them out. That's the dorm room.
There's an element of when people talk about dormhood or dorm room movies when they're talking about like raw emotion on display or like or emotion that you know, it's highly volatile, and then it's like, what, as we age, we're supposed to accept that our emotions are more muted. Like, I think that's kind of almost a cliche in a way, like, and it's kind of depressing. So I would, do you guys see what I'm saying? The idea is like,
I'd say the dorm room movies we're describing are less truly emotional, or they're more maybe superficial in terms of, you know, what they're bringing. It's more of a cerebral and maybe kind of just, again, kind of pushing the buttons of your self-image or your, you know, sort of critical taste, or it's, you know, it's the cool factor as opposed to real, you know, sort of substance.
Like, people would think I'm cool for watching it as opposed to it actually being good.
Sure, or
I mean, they could be good, but
you know,
whether it's good or not is like independent. Like that's a different conversation as to whether it's a dorm movie.
Right.
Yeah.
Like there are good and bad dorm movies, like any other kind of movie. But you know, as much as I've been complaining, I do think you should see it. I would actually recommend it because it is interesting, and I think there's a lot of kind of cool stuff in it, even if ultimately it left me a little cold.
Yeah, Kirk, I could see you actually having a kind of interest in it. I don't know if you'd like it or not, but I could see you having this sort of, you know, based on the way you think about movies often. Yeah.
Well, Matt Damon put on the weight that I lost, so I want to see it.
There you go.
Yeah.